Undocumented immigration has shaped American politics and society for generations. A handful of countries account for the large majority of the unauthorized population living in the U.S. today, and each one has its own story: economic hardship, violence, natural disaster, or simply the pull of opportunity. This video breaks down the top 10 countries of origin, why people leave, and what their lives look like once they arrive. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get into the list. 10. Mexico. Mexico remains the single largest source of unauthorized immigrants in the United States, though its share of the total has shrunk dramatically over the past 2 decades. Roughly 4 million Mexican nationals are currently living in the U.S. without legal status, still the biggest group by far, but a much smaller slice of the overall undocumented population than it was 20 years ago. Why people leave: limited wages and job scarcity back home push many north. Cartel violence in certain regions makes staying too dangerous for some families. And because so many Mexican immigrants already have relatives in the U.S., family ties keep pulling new arrivals across the border. The trend, migration from Mexico, has slowed as its economy has strengthened and border enforcement has tightened, but it still leads every other country by a wide margin. 9. Ukraine. Ukraine's undocumented population in the U.S. has grown faster than almost any other countries in recent years, more than doubling in a short span as the war with Russia dragged on. Why people leave: the Russian invasion displaced millions of Ukrainians, and many who made it to the U.S. came through emergency humanitarian parole programs rather than a standard visa or green card process. Ongoing fighting, destroyed infrastructure, and economic collapse back home give people little incentive to return. Family members already sheltering in the U.S. pull others to follow. Policy factor: parole status is temporary by design, and many of the programs that let Ukrainians enter legally have since been scaled back or ended, leaving a growing number of people without a clear path to permanent status even though they entered the country lawfully. 8. India. India has climbed the list fast, now home to hundreds of thousands of Indian nationals living in the U.S. without authorization, a sharp jump from a decade ago. Why people leave: unlike migrants fleeing violence, most Indian undocumented immigrants are motivated by opportunity. Strict visa requirements, especially around education and English proficiency, shut a lot of applicants out of legal pathways. Professional smuggling networks have stepped in to fill the gap, sometimes charging life savings for a single crossing. Who's coming? The typical profile is a young man in his 20s or early 30s chasing better pay and a higher standard of living, not escaping poverty or conflict. 7. The Netherlands. Dutch nationals make up one of the smallest undocumented populations on this list, but they're part of a steady, largely invisible pattern of Western European visa overstays that rarely gets attention in the immigration debate. Why people leave: almost none of it is driven by conflict or poverty. The pull is mostly economic and personal: tourists, students, or workers who arrive legally and simply stay past their visa's expiration for a job, a relationship, or a better cost of living. Because Dutch travelers rarely need a visa to enter the U.S. in the first place, tracking exactly how many overstay is difficult, and the numbers are folded into broader, Western Europe, totals in most government estimates. Who's affected? This group tends to blend into communities without drawing enforcement attention, since Dutch overstayers don't fit the profile most immigration policy is built around. 6. Venezuela. Venezuela's collapse has turned it into one of the fastest-growing sources of migration to the U.S., with the undocumented population climbing steeply since the mid-2020s. Why people leave: years of political turmoil have left many afraid of retaliation for opposing the government. Hyperinflation has gutted the economy, making basic goods like food and medicine hard to find. Documented human rights abuses have pushed even more people to flee. Who's coming? Venezuelan migrants skew younger and more educated than many other groups, professionals who simply can no longer make a living at home. 5. The Philippines. Filipino migration to the U.S. goes back over a century, and today a substantial undocumented population, often called TNT, short for a Filipino phrase meaning always hiding, lives in the country. Why people leave: underemployment and low wages at home send many searching for better-paying work abroad. Strong family networks already in the U.S. pull relatives to join them. Others come chasing education or career advancement that's harder to reach in the Philippines. How it happens: many enter legally on a visa and simply stay past its expiration, rather than crossing a border illegally. 4. China. China has become a steadily growing source of unauthorized immigration, with hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals now living in the U.S. without status. Why people leave: some are fleeing political repression, particularly those who've spoken out against the government. Others come from rural regions with far fewer opportunities than China's booming cities. Students who studied in the U.S. sometimes overstay their visas rather than return to a tough job market back home. Where they land: Chinese undocumented immigrants cluster heavily in cities like New York and Los Angeles, where established communities offer support. 3. Colombia. Colombia's undocumented population in the U.S. has grown steadily, driven by decades of internal conflict and economic pressure. Why people leave: guerrilla groups, paramilitaries, and drug trafficking organizations have displaced millions inside Colombia over the years. High unemployment and corruption add to the pressure to leave. Many who arrive on temporary visas end up staying past their expiration rather than risk an illegal crossing. Where they land: Miami, New York, and Los Angeles all have large, established Colombian communities. 2. Brazil. Brazil has emerged as a growing source of unauthorized migration to the U.S. in recent years. Why people leave: despite having one of the largest economies in South America, unemployment and inflation have squeezed many Brazilian households. Political instability and public frustration with government have added fuel. Rising crime and inequality push others to look abroad for a fresh start. Where they land: Florida, Massachusetts, and California host the largest Brazilian communities in the country. 1. Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic rounds out the list, with a large and long-established undocumented population in the U.S. dating back to major migration waves in the 1980s. Why people leave: persistent unemployment and poverty are the biggest drivers. Political corruption and instability have historically pushed people to look for stability elsewhere. As with several countries on this list, family reunification keeps the migration pipeline active. New arrivals often join relatives already settled in the U.S. Where they land: New York City, Miami, and Boston all have deeply rooted Dominican communities that help new arrivals get on their feet. Wrapping up. That's the rundown of the top 10 countries sending the most undocumented immigrants to the United States. The reasons vary enormously: economic desperation, gang and cartel violence, political collapse, natural disasters, or simply the search for a better job, but the common thread is that each of these journeys is shaped by conditions back home as much as by opportunity in the U.S. As those conditions keep shifting, so will these numbers. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this one.